Welcome to the deep dive. Let's jump right in.
Yeah.
Your 20s. Everyone talks about this decade, right? Freedom, possibilities. But honestly, for so many people, it feels more like this intense, high-stakes maze of decisions.
Absolutely. Career, relationships, even just trying to figure out who you are.
Exactly. Did that sound familiar to you listening? That feeling of being maybe a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah, and that specific feeling, that's what we're diving into today. We're unpacking the psychology behind why your 20s can feel like such a pressure cooker for choices.
Right.
Think of it like getting the owner's manual for your mind during this, well, pretty unique stage. We'll be looking at brain development research, decision-making science, identity formation.
So the real science behind it all.
Right. And the goal is pretty simple, really.
Yeah.
Offer some clarity, maybe some validation, let you know that if you're wrestling with these big life questions, you are definitely not alone.
So, yeah, if you're in that whirlwind right now,
Yeah.
facing what feel like just huge decisions, or maybe just hearing that constant hum of, I need to figure things out.
Yeah.
This is for you. Okay, so where do we start? One of the things that really struck me is that biologically, even though you're an adult, your brain is, well, it's still under construction.
That's exactly right. It sounds a bit weird, but the prefrontal cortex, that's the bit responsible for, rational thought, planning, thinking about consequences. It doesn't actually fully mature until your mid, maybe even late 20s.
Which is pretty wild when you think that the other part, the limbic system, more the emotional reward-seeking part, that's already going full tilt in your 20s. So it's like the feelings are dialed way up.
Right.
But the part that helps you pause and think it through logically, it's lagging behind.
Exactly. It's this kind of biological mismatch, a tug of war almost. You've got these really intense emotions. You're driven by impulses, by what feels good now. But those brain pathways for calm, rational decision-making, they're still, getting paved. And what's really interesting is how this mismatch can fuel that sense of emotional chaos and even what we call decision fatigue. Just feeling totally drained by having to choose.
So it really is like having this super powerful engine, but maybe not quite having full steering control yet.
That's a great analogy.
And speaking of feeling drained, let's talk about options. Because you'd think, okay, more choices, that's good, right? More possibilities.
You'd think so, but not always. There's this concept from psychologist Barry Schwartz called the paradox of choice. And basically his research shows that while, some choice is good, too much choice can actually crank up anxiety.
Oh, I feel that.
Yeah, it makes it harder to decide, and then you're more likely to regret whatever you do choose.
That makes so much sense. Like, think about trying to pick a major or even something simple like what to watch on Netflix these days.
Exactly. Endless scrolling.
You spend more time choosing than actually doing the thing.
Precisely. And that flood of options directly fuels decision fatigue. We only have so much mental energy for making choices each day. Right? It's a limited resource.
Okay.
So when you're constantly bombarded with possibilities, even little ones, you just deplete that energy. Now, apply that to your 20s, where the decisions are huge: career, love, where to live.
Yeah.
It's hardly surprising you might feel exhausted, struggle to make a clear call, maybe just go with the easiest thing, or, avoid deciding altogether.
Okay, so the brain's still developing. We're drowning in options. And on top of that, this is also the time when we're fundamentally trying to figure out who we even are. That adds a whole other layer, right?
Right, a massive layer. And that brings us to Erik Erikson's work on psychosocial development. He talked about this key challenge for this age group: identity versus role confusion.
Right.
So in your 20s, you're actively grappling with these really fundamental questions. Who am I, really? What do I actually value? What kind of life do I want?
It's like you're trying on different hats. You're not quite the kid you were, but the adult version isn't fully formed yet either.
Exactly. You're experimenting, trying out different jobs, different friend groups, different versions of yourself to see what fits, what feels authentic. And that's how it's supposed to be, really. It's an exploratory phase. You're meant to try things, maybe mess up sometimes, and sort of refine who you are through experience. But that internal exploration often clashes hard with the external pressure, right?
Yeah.
The pressure to have it all figured out now. The perfect job, the perfect partner, the perfect life plan laid out.
Yeah, the Instagram version of life.
Totally. And that disconnect between the internal reality and the external expectation, that can cause a lot of stress and internal conflict.
So we've got the brain, the choices, the identity crisis.
Yeah.
It really feels like there's this whole distinct phase of life dedicated to this in-betweenness.
There is. Jeffrey Arnett actually coined a term for it, emerging adulthood. Basically, that stretch from about 18 to 29, it's distinct. You're not quite an adolescent, dependent in the same way, but you haven't necessarily taken on all the settled responsibilities of later adulthood either. And he identified 5 key features. First, instability. Lots of changes in jobs, relationships, where you live. That's common.
Right. And second, as we just talked about, that intense identity exploration.
Exactly. Then there's often a strong self-focus. It might be the first time you have real autonomy to prioritize your own needs and wants without, say, constant parental input.
Yeah, definitely see that.
But then there's also that feeling of being in between, like not quite a kid anymore, but maybe not feeling like a proper adult yet either.
Totally. Feeling like you're faking it sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And finally, a real sense of possibilities. The feeling that your future is wide open, that you could go in so many directions. Which sounds great, and it can be exciting.
Well, also terrifying.
But it also ramps up the pressure, right? The pressure to choose the right path when everything feels so wide open and uncertain.
It really is like standing at this massive crossroads with 100 paths leading off and feeling like you absolutely have to pick the single best one right this second.
Yeah.
And to make it even harder, it often feels like everyone else is navigating it so much better, like they have a map you didn't get.
Yeah.
Social comparison kicks in hard.
Oh, massively. Leon Festinger's social comparison theory is all about how we naturally figure out our own standing by comparing ourselves to others.
Okay.
The big challenge now, especially with social media, is that you're constantly comparing your, let's say, behind-the-scenes messes, the doubts, the struggles, the uncertainties.
And see your real life.
To everyone else's curated highlight reel.
Ugh, yes.
Yeah.
You see the posts about the amazing new job, the engagement photos, the perfect vacation, and it's just so easy to feel like you're falling behind or just not measuring up.
Even if objectively you're doing totally fine on your own path.
Yeah, it's that classic trap.
Yeah.
Comparing your messy reality to their polished image.
And that constant comparison, it can really fuel feelings of inadequacy, maybe even failure, even when your own journey is perfectly okay for you. It's so important to remember, social media is rarely the whole story. It's usually just the shiny bits.
Okay, so let's recap where we are. We've got the brain development lag, the overload of choices, the identity quest, this unstable emerging phase, and the constant pressure cooker of social comparison.
Mm-hmm.
It's no wonder decisions feel so incredibly heavy.
Mm.
And I think a huge part of that weight is just the fear of messing up, of making the wrong choice.
That fear of regret, yeah, it definitely feels amplified in your 20s. There's often this sort of underlying belief that the choices you make now are going to lock you in forever, that they'll determine your whole future path.
Which can be paralyzing.
Totally. It can lead to this analysis paralysis where the fear of making a mistake is actually stronger than the motivation to just make a decision. And this is where something called cognitive dissonance can really bite. That uncomfortable feeling when your actions or beliefs clash, like wanting a clear path but feeling totally unsure of your values. It makes every choice feel super risky.
But isn't it also true that we're kind of bad at predicting how we'll actually feel about things in the future? We build stuff up in our heads, good and bad.
Oh, absolutely. Psychologists call it effective forecasting error. Basically, we tend to overestimate how intense our emotional reactions will be to future events and how long those feelings will last, both the good and the bad.
Okay.
So yeah, the idea of making the wrong choice might feel absolutely catastrophic right now, but the reality is people are usually way more resilient and adaptable than they give themselves credit for. Most choices aren't nearly as permanent as they feel in the heat of the moment.
That's actually really important to remember. It's so easy to get lost in the immediate anxiety. And speaking of emotions, they just feel extra intense in your 20s, don't they?
Yep.
Like 1 minute you're flying high, the next you're questioning absolutely everything.
That emotional roller coaster feel, yeah, it's real. It's down to a mix of things. Hormones are still shifting. You're going through a ton of big life changes in a short span. And like we said, that prefrontal cortex, the emotion regulator, is still getting up to speed.
So you get these intense highs and lows.
Yeah, sometimes really quickly, one after the other.
And that must make decisions even trickier. Because, a sudden wave of fear could feel like this giant warning sign to back off something.
Right.
Or a burst of excitement could make you jump into something that maybe isn't actually a great fit long term.
Exactly. Learning to tell the difference between those temporary emotional states and your deeper, more stable values or goals, that's a huge and often really challenging developmental task of this decade.
And maybe part of what makes it also hard is just plain lack of experience.
Yeah.
It feels like everyone older has this secret life manual you just haven't received yet.
That's such a common feeling, and there's truth to it. Older adults often seem more confident, right? But it's not usually because they're inherently smarter.
Right.
It's because they've built up this bigger database of experiences. They've seen more stuff play out. They've navigated more challenges. They've developed some intuition just through trial and error over years.
Yeah.
In your 20s, you're still building that internal compass, that mental library of what works for you. And that lack of lived experience can make even relatively small decisions feel like these massive leaps into the dark.
And then you pile on just the sheer volume of new adult stuff you're suddenly expected to manage.
Right.
Bills, relationships, work pressure, groceries. It can feel like just keeping all those plates spinning is overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely. Managing your time, handling money, keeping relationships healthy, looking after your own well-being physically and mentally, performing at work. These are all complex skills, executive functions.
Yeah.
And in your 20s, you're often learning them all at once, kind of on the fly, without the same structured support you might have had before. So feeling like you're behind or disorganized or even failing sometimes, that's completely normal. It's just part of the learning curve of adulthood.
It also feels like sometimes we're carrying around these old ideas from childhood, like deep-seated beliefs that then just mess with our adult decisions without us even realizing it.
That's a really key idea from something called schema theory. Schemas are these ingrained beliefs, these patterns of thinking we develop from our early life experiences. They shape how we see ourselves, other people, the world.
You give an example?
Sure. Like maybe you grew up feeling you had to constantly achieve things to get love or approval. If that's your underlying schema.
Then every career choice feels like a test of your worth.
Exactly. It feels incredibly high stakes. Or maybe mistakes were treated really harshly when you were young. That schema could make the fear of making any wrong choice feel completely paralyzing as an adult. These old beliefs can add so much emotional weight to decisions that might otherwise be more straightforward.
Wow. And all of this stuff combined, I guess it can lead to what people sometimes call the quarter-life crisis. It sounds a bit dramatic, but it seems pretty common.
It really is increasingly recognized. It's this period of intense questioning, maybe some emotional turmoil, that often hits somewhere between the early 20s and early 30s.
What usually triggers it?
Often it's this dawning realization that the path you're on, maybe the job, the relationship, the whole lifestyle just doesn't feel right anymore. It doesn't align with who you feel you really are or what you truly want.
That feeling of being stuck.
Exactly. Feeling stuck, unfulfilled, that can trigger a lot of anxiety. And yeah, sometimes it does lead to big changes, quitting jobs, ending relationships. But while it can feel really disruptive, it's often a crucial catalyst for self-reflection. It pushes you to figure things out and ultimately can lead to a life that feels more authentic.
It's almost like you're juggling all these different potential versions of yourself too, right?
Yeah.
Like I could be an artist, I could be a lawyer, I could travel the world. And picking one feels like shutting down all the others.
That links perfectly to Hazel Marcus's idea of possible selves. In your 20s, you probably have loads of these imagined future identities floating around who you hope to become, maybe who you're scared of becoming. And having so many possibilities, while exciting on one level, makes it incredibly hard to actually commit to one path, because choosing one feels like actively saying no to all those other appealing options.
Yeah, the fear of missing out, but on a life scale. And I think there's also this subtle, or maybe not so subtle, pressure in society to just be constantly happy and successful in your 20s.
Yeah.
Which just doesn't match the reality for most people, does it?
Not usually, no. And there's actually research on this, the U-shaped curve of life satisfaction. Studies tend to show that happiness levels often dip a bit in the late 20s and early 30s.
Really? Why is that?
Well, several reasons are suggested. You're often working really hard, but maybe not seeing the big rewards yet. Your youthful dreams and ideals might be bumping up against the harsher realities of adult life.
Okay.
And you're constantly reevaluating what actually matters to you as you get more experience. It can be a tough phase. But the hopeful part is the curve generally trends upwards again later. Things often do get better as your expectations stabilize and your values become clearer.
So it's normal for things to feel a bit less satisfying for a while. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong.
Precisely. It's part of the process.
It also feels like we operate under this illusion that every single decision we make in our 20s is permanent. Like it's this huge irreversible fork in the road, and we only get one chance to get it right.
Yeah, we could call that the one-shot illusion. This mistaken belief that every choice is final must be perfect because there are no do-overs.
But that's not really true, is it?
Not usually, no. Research on regret and how people adapt shows that most choices are way more flexible or reversible than they feel at the time. People change careers, they move, they end relationships and start new ones, they adjust their plans constantly.
We're more resilient than we think.
Incredibly resilient. We have this amazing capacity to adapt, to change course, and to find happiness even when things don't go exactly according to the original plan.
So it sounds like fundamentally in your 20s, you're still very much putting the pieces together, figuring out who you are.
Exactly. Your sense of self, that integrated feeling of this is me, it's still very much under construction. You're figuring out how all the different parts fit your personality, your values, your hopes, how you act.
It's like writing the first few chapters of a book.
That's a perfect analogy. There's bound to be some confusion, some uncertainty, maybe some plot holes as the story unfolds. But that confusion isn't failure. It's just part of the writing process.
Okay, so when it comes down to it, all those feelings, the indecision, the overwhelm, the confusion in your 20s.
They are incredibly, incredibly normal. They absolutely do not mean you're broken or failing or doing something wrong.
Right.
They're actually signs that you're actively growing. You're grappling with the real complexities of this unique life stage. Your 20s are meant for experimenting, for reflecting, for making mistakes sometimes, learning from them, and then maybe re-choosing your direction as you get clearer.
So the goal isn't have it all figured out.
Not at all. The goal is more like building a foundation, one step at a time, even if those steps feel imperfect or confusing sometimes.
That's actually really reassuring to hear. And you mentioned earlier there are some helpful tools or approaches people can use when they're navigating all this.
Yes, absolutely. There are definitely things that can help. For instance, if you get caught in those negative thought spirals, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, can be really useful for learning to spot and challenge those patterns.
Okay.
Acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, is great for helping you figure out your core values and then act in line with them, even when things feel uncertain or difficult. And things like mindfulness and practicing self-compassion are just invaluable for quieting that harsh inner critic and giving yourself permission to be imperfect, to make mistakes.
And narrative therapy.
Yeah, narrative therapy can help you look at your life story differently. Maybe focus less on the perceived missteps and more on your strengths, your resilience, how you've grown, reframing the narrative.
So just to kind of pull it all together, what we've really dug into today is that these decision-making struggles in your 20s, they aren't just random bad feelings.
Not at all.
They're tied to real things our brain's still developing. The sheer number of options, the huge task of figuring out our identity, this whole emerging adulthood phase, plus all those psychological pressures like comparison and old beliefs.
Exactly. And if there's one main takeaway, it's this. If you're in your 20s and you feel the weight of all this, please know you are so far from alone. These feelings are common, they have real psychological roots.
It's part of the process.
It's fundamentally part of growth and exploration.
Right.
A certain amount of confusion isn't just normal, it's probably a sign you're actually engaging with it all, which is exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
So maybe something for you to think about this week. Which of these factors we talked about really resonates with you? Is it the paradox of choice making you second-guess everything? Is it the social comparison trap? That fear of the wrong choice holding you back?
Just noticing what feels true for you.
Yeah. And maybe think about one small step you could take, maybe inspired by some of those tools we mentioned, just to approach things with a little more kindness toward yourself, a little less pressure. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
And really, go easy on yourself. You're a work in progress. And that's exactly where you need to be right now.